In the days when Hertfordshire's fields were a tapestry of wild heather and gnarled oaks, before the great North Road was paved and tamed, the land around Stevenage thrummed with secrets. Whomerly Wood, a sprawling tangle of ancient yews and thorn-choked paths, crouched like a sleeping beast along the road's edge. Its shadows were heavy, its silence heavier still. No bird dared sing there after dusk, and even the boldest wayfarers, merchants with their creaking wagons, pilgrims with their whispered prayers, quickened their pace as the wood loomed near. Old folk in Stevenage spoke of Whomerly in hushed tones, claiming it wasn't just foxes or owls that stirred its depths, but something older, fouler, with eyes like embers and a voice that could curdle the soul. Among the townsfolk was Agnes, a widow with silver-streaked hair and a spine as unyielding as the oak staff she leaned upon. She was the keeper of Stevenage's stories, the one who wove tales by the hearth to warn children and remind adults that the world was not always kind. Agnes had seen 70 winters, and her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, held memories no one dared ask about. She'd lost her husband to Whomerly Wood years ago, a hunter who ventured too deep and never returned. Some said he'd been taken by a wolf, others by the wood itself. Agnes never spoke of it, but her warnings about the wood carried a weight that silenced even the brashest tavern brass. One autumn, when the air grew sharp and the leaves bled crimson, a stranger came to Stevenage. He called himself Elias, a wiry man with a tattered cloak and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He spoke little, paid for his ale in strange, tarnished coins, and asked questions about the 6 hills, those peculiar mounds that dotted the roadside like the humped backs of slumbering giants. The townsfolk, wary of outsiders, gave vague answers, but Elias was persistent. He lingered by the hills at dusk, sketching their shapes in a leather-bound book, muttering to himself in a tongue no one recognized. Agnes watched him from afar, her grip tightening on her staff. She'd seen men like Elias before, seekers of old things, drawn to the whispers of Whomerly Wood. "Leave the hills be," she warned him one evening, her voice low as she caught him by the tavern door. "They're not for meddling. The devil's handiwork, they are, and he don't take kindly to thieves." Elias laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone. "The devil's just a story, old mother," he said, tipping his hat, "and stories don't scare me." But Agnes knew better. She knew the tale of the 6 hills, not as a fireside yarn, but as a truth carved into the bones of the land. Long ago, when the world was young and the stars burned brighter, the devil himself walked Whomerly Wood. Old Nick, they called him, with horns curling like blackened thorns and a tail that lashed sparks from the earth. Some said he'd been slighted by Stevenage's folk, whose prayers and church bells had woven a net of faith that kept him at bay. Others claimed he was simply bored, as devils often are, and craved chaos to sat his restless heart. That night, the sky was black as pitch, the moon hidden behind a shroud of clouds. The air in Whomerly Wood grew still, the kind of stillness that presses against the chest and makes the heart stutter. Old Nick, his eyes glowing like twin coals, set to work. With claws that could rend stone, he dug into the earth, tearing great gashes in the soil. 7 holes he carved, each deeper and darker than the last, their depths swallowing starlight. His hooves churned the ground, uprooting trees and shattering rocks, while his laughter echoed like thunder, shaking the dreams of every soul in Stevenage. Each spadeful of earth he heaved high, meaning to bury the town in a deluge of dirt and stone. He flung the soil with reckless fury, his tail whipping the air, his roars drowning out the distant church bells. But the devil, for all his might, was not infallible. Whether by his own carelessness or the subtle hand of a higher power, his throws went awry. 6 great mounds of earth plummeted from the sky, landing in a scattered line along the great north road. They rose like silent sentinels, their slopes cloaked in grass that never seemed to grow or wither. The 6 hills, they were called, and though they stood quiet, they carried the weight of the devil's wrath. Frustrated, old Nick scooped one final, monstrous heap of soil, larger than all the rest. His eyes fixed on the spire of Gravely's church, a needle of stone that gleamed defiantly against the night. With a snarl that split the air, he hurled the earth. The mound struck true, smashing the spire from its roots in a cascade of shattered stone. The church groaned like a wounded beast, and the devil's laughter rolled across the fields, a sound that lingered in the wind for centuries. The folk of Gravely rebuilt their church, but the new spire was never quite as tall, never quite as proud. On moonlit nights, they said, you could still hear the echo of that laughter, faint but unmistakable, curling through the churchyard like smoke. Back in Stevenage, Elias's curiosity grew into obsession. He spent nights by the 6 hills, digging at their edges with a small spade, searching for something he wouldn't name. The townsfolk whispered about him, some calling him a fool, others a sorcerer. Children dared each other to spy on him, but none ventured close. Only Agnes watched without fear, her staff tapping the ground as she followed his movements. One night, when the moon hung low and the air was thick with frost, Elias crossed a line. He stood atop the largest of the 6 hills, a crude iron pendant dangling from his neck, chanting words that made the stars flicker. Agnes, hidden in the shadow of an oak, felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. The air grew heavy, the silence of Whomerly Wood deepening until it was a presence of its own. A scent like brimstone stung her nose, and the hairs on her arms stood on end. "Fool," she hissed, stepping into the open. "You've called him." Elias turned, his face pale but defiant. "I know what I'm doing, old woman. The hills hold power, his power, and I mean to claim it." Before Agnes could answer, the ground shuddered violently. The hill beneath Elias split, a jagged crack snaking through the earth. From its depths came a glow, red as forge fire, and a sound like the growl of 1,000 wolves. Elias stumbled, his bravado crumbling, but it was too late. A clawed hand, black as coal and vast as a cartwheel, burst from the crack, seizing him. His scream was brief, swallowed by the earth as the hill sealed itself shut. The night fell silent once more, the stars steadying in their places. Agnes stood alone, her heart pounding but her resolve unbroken. She drove her staff into the ground, muttering a prayer older than the church itself, one her grandmother had taught her for warding off the dark. The air lightened, the brimstone scent fading, but Agnes knew the hills were not done. They never would be. By morning, Elias was gone, his book and spade abandoned by the roadside. The townsfolk spoke of him in whispers, adding his name to the long list of those claimed by Whomerly Wood. Agnes said nothing, but she began carving runes into her staff, symbols to strengthen the old wards. She knew the devil hadn't left, not truly. He was patient, and the 6 hills were his promise, a reminder that he'd return one day to finish what he'd started. To this day, the 6 hills stand along the Great North Road, their shapes unchanged by time. Travellers pass them with a nod or a tip of the hat, half in jest, half in fear. The church at Gravelly still bears its stunted spire, and on cold, moonlit nights, the wind carries a faint, mocking laugh. Whomerly Wood remains, its shadows as deep as ever, its silence a warning. So heed Agnes's words, if you tread that road. Spare a glance for the 6 hills, but don't linger. They're more than earth and grass, they're the devil's handfuls, lying in wait for the day he fancies another throw. Many thanks for treading this tale's dark path. If its chill gripped you, like, follow, subscribe, and comment below.